He has been sitting there for nearly 200 years. Students walk past him every day. Tourists stop and stare. Some laugh. Others feel deeply uncomfortable, because the man inside that glass case isn't a statue. He isn't a wax figure. And he isn't a memorial. He's real. Or at least, most of him is. His name was Jeremy Bentham, and he may be the only person in history who spent decades planning not just his life, but his death. Most people hope to be remembered. Bentham wanted something stranger. He wanted to remain physically present forever, and somehow he got exactly what he wanted. Nearly 2 centuries later, his body still remains. Visitors still come to see it, and one question remains. Why did he want to be displayed forever? The answer begins in 18th century London. Born in 1748, Jeremy Bentham was a child prodigy. From a young age, he questioned everything. Why do societies follow certain laws? Why do governments hold power? Why do traditions survive for centuries? The more he studied, the more frustrated he became. Britain was filled with customs that existed simply because they always had. Bentham believed that wasn't good enough. Nothing should be accepted blindly. Not religion, not politics, not morality. Everything should be tested by one simple question. Does it make people's lives better? This idea became known as Utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number. The philosophy made Bentham famous across Europe, but it also led him to an obsession that most people try not to think about: death. Bentham looked at death the same way he looked at everything else, not as a mystery, but as a problem. Medical schools needed bodies, but many feared dissection, so grave robbers stole corpses, then sold them to doctors. Bentham thought the entire situation was irrational. Why let a body decay underground when it could still be useful? Why waste knowledge because of tradition? Then a radical idea began to form. If society needed an example, why not use his own body? What if death wasn't the end of his usefulness? What if he could continue teaching long after he was gone? His idea shocked his friends. It confused his critics and made him famous in death. Because Bentham wasn't just planning for death. He was planning for life after death. And the instructions he left behind were unlike anything the world had ever seen. By the early 19th century, Jeremy Bentham was no longer just a philosopher. He was one of Britain's most influential thinkers. Politicians sought his advice. Reformers quoted his ideas. Students studied his work. But while others spent their later years thinking about retirement, Bentham became obsessed with something else: death. The more he studied death, the more irrational it seemed. Funerals were expensive. Burials took up land. Religion controlled what could be done with bodies. To Bentham, it made no sense. A dead body could no longer feel pain. So why should it matter what happened to it? Applying the same logic that had guided his entire life, Bentham reached a startling conclusion. After his death, his body should be dissected publicly for scientific education. But he didn't stop there. He wanted his skeleton preserved, dressed in his own clothes and permanently displayed. He even gave the idea a name: the auto-icon, a memorial made from the actual person. Why build statues, Bentham argued, when the real individual could remain? The idea sounded bizarre, even disturbing. Yet Bentham believed it was the future. Most people dismissed it as another eccentric theory, until 1832. At the age of 84, Jeremy Bentham died. and suddenly the impossible plan became reality. According to his instructions, his body was publicly dissected before medical students and observers. Even in death, Bentham intended to teach. Then came the challenge of creating the auto-icon. His skeleton was successfully preserved. But there was one major problem: his head. Bentham wanted his real head displayed, but the preservation process failed. The result was disastrous. The result was dark, shriveled, and deeply unsettling. Friends were horrified. The face barely resembled the famous philosopher. Instead of looking immortal, it looked like something from a nightmare. The caretakers faced a difficult choice: display the real head as Bentham requested, or find another solution. Eventually, they compromised. A wax head was created and attached to the preserved skeleton, which was dressed in Bentham's own clothing. At last, the auto-icon was complete. A seated gentleman, walking stick in hand, frozen in time. At first glance, it seemed almost ordinary, until people learned what was beneath the clothes: the actual skeleton of Jeremy Bentham. And somewhere nearby, hidden away, rested the real head, the one that had gone horribly wrong. What happened next would turn Bentham from a respected philosopher into something far stranger, because the auto-icon didn't fade into obscurity. It became a curiosity, a legend, and soon his quest for immortality would take an even more bizarre turn. Once the auto-icon was completed, Jeremy Bentham achieved something few people ever have. He became famous twice, first in life, then in death. His body was placed at University College London. Students still walk past it today. But the real head was the strange part. It was too disturbing to display. So it was replaced with a wax one. The real head was later used for student pranks. Then, in 1975, it was stolen. Not money, not jewelry, a philosopher's mummified head. The thieves even demanded money for its return. The head was eventually recovered and locked away, where it remains today. Yet the real mystery isn't the theft or the preserved skeleton. It's that Bentham succeeded. Most philosophers leave behind ideas. Bentham left behind ideas, and himself. Nearly 2 centuries after his death, people still know his name, not because of a statue, but because he became the monument. Perhaps that's why his story endures. Like everyone else, Bentham feared being forgotten, so he found his own path to immortality. And somewhere in London, inside a glass case, he still sits. A man who refused to disappear, a mystery that time could never bury.